Okay, ready to go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on making reliable claims and applying the guidelines for providing product sustainability information. I'm Rosie Kendall, Principal Case Officer at the UK Competition and Markets Authority. Today's webinar is brought to you by the UN Environment Programme and members of the International Consumer Protection Network, ICPEN. We will begin with a session run by Nils from the UN Environment Programme. Nils will run through the UN guidelines for providing product sustainability information. This will be followed by a session on the UK's CMA Green Claims Code. And finally, Andrea and Ana Filipa from the Portuguese Ministry of Economy and the Digital Transition, the Consumer Directorate General, will provide a presentation on their guidelines. We have allowed time for questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to add any questions you'd like to the chat. And just bear in mind that while it may be the same for the other presenters, but while I'm presenting my presentation, I won't be able to see the chat because of the way that our system works. So if anything urgent crops up though, if somebody can please just verbally raise it, Nils or Andrea, that would be really helpful. And now I'm going to pass over to Nils for his presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosie, and also welcome to all attendees from my side. Very happy to be here today and to collaborate with ICPEN members on this important topic of green claims. So let me just bring up my presentation. So my name is Niels Hoyer and I work at the UN Environment Program on consumer information and eco-labeling. And I'm also coordinating the One Planet Network Consumer Information Program. And yeah, today I wanted to talk about the UN and ITC guidelines for providing product sustainability information that we developed in 2017 and that we've been working with since, to strengthen the credibility of consumer information. So just a little bit of background on how the guidelines were developed and mention also the One Planet Network and the Consumer Information Program. So the One Planet Network was founded in 2012 to address Sustainable Development Goal 12 of the SDGs and is a global commitment to accelerate a shift towards sustainable consumption and production. There are 6 different programs, 3 sectoral programs on food systems, tourism, and buildings, and 3 cross-cutting programs on consumer information, sustainable lifestyles, and public procurement. And it's a multi-stakeholder network, basically, from government, businesses, and civil society organizations coming together to work on this important agenda. And I'm working on the consumer information program that is co-led by Consumers International and the environment ministries of Germany and Indonesia. And we are focusing on supporting the provision of credible sustainability information on goods and services and to develop effective strategies to engage consumers in sustainable consumption. Just about the objectives of the guidelines that I'm talking about today. So as I said, they were developed in 2017 in a multi-stakeholder process with many partners of the Consumer Information Program. We had several multi-stakeholder workshops, let's say, and to develop the guidelines, and the objectives of them are to contribute to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 12, aligned with the One Planet Network overall, improve the reliability of consumer information, and set a common ground of minimum requirements to remove the potential for greenwashing, and also actively encourage organizations to take leadership and communicate credible and effective information to consumers. In the Sustainable Development Goals, there's also a sub-target 12.8 that asks to ensure that by 2030, people everywhere have the relevant information and awareness for sustainable development and lifestyles in harmony with nature. So that's what we are working towards. And 2030 is not that long away anymore. It's coming up much faster, and there's a lot of progress to be made. Regarding the target audience of the guidelines, so it's very broad, let's say. I mean, we try to target many different actors with different kind of objectives. So we work, we want to address private sector and marketing organizations to apply the guidelines for development of their product sustainability information and claims. Then we also want to address labeling and voluntary sustainability standard schemes of different labels basically also should apply the guidelines and meet the principles in their labels. Also, governments are an important target audience for us in kind of setting up policies aligned with the guidelines. So here we have some new collaboration, for example, with Colombia and other countries in Latin America that are interested in passing legislation aligned with the guidelines that we developed. And then in the last section, we have trade unions, consumer and environmental organizations, and also market surveillance or authorities like the ICPEN members here today that we want to encourage to check the quality of product sustainability information compared to the guidelines principles. So what kind of information do the guidelines cover? We really wanted to be very broad and said that all tools and systems that seek to guide consumers to make more sustainable choices on goods and services are kind of addressed and should be aligned with the guidelines. So it could be claims, it could be labels, other types of communication really from companies, voluntary standards, product declarations, footprinting tools. I mean, that's also something we see more and more. Different digital apps are coming up as well. Yeah, so everything that communicates environmental, social, and economic issues connected to products. Then we also have a mindset that we developed that is important for applying the guidelines. And the main point here is to adopt a life cycle thinking. So, and here it's important to distinguish that life cycle thinking is not necessarily based on life cycle assessment. So it doesn't necessarily need to be substantiated with a very comprehensive impact assessment and methodology, but just in general to think about products and the entire life cycle of products when you talk about sustainability and apply also a hotspot analysis approach. So this is to identify the most impactful or relevant stages, activities, material and energy flows, and impacts within a product's life cycle. That's also quite a critical point. And finally, to also try and mainstream sustainability across the operations of the company. So that it's really not just about one product, but integrated into the entire management process and decision making. So now we come to the principles of the guidelines. We have 10 principles and they're divided into fundamental and aspirational principles. And together they aim to provide effective, trustworthy sustainability claims. I'll go now through all of the 10 principles one by one. And we start with the fundamental principles. So these are the ones we think should always be met. Reliability, relevance, clarity, transparency, and accessibility. Yeah, they're quite, like, let's say the baseline that we think should be met by all the claims being made. And we start with the principle of reliability. So to build your claims on a reliable basis, that means it needs to be accurate and scientifically true, robust and consistent, with substantiated data and assumptions. So a good way to ensure the reliability is to work with third-party verifications and let's say accepted methodologies. For example, here we have an example on if you have an organic t-shirt, there are already existing standards like GOTS out there that you can use to underline the reliability of the information. The second principle is relevance. This means to talk about major improvements in areas that matter. So this relates to the hotspot analysis approach that I mentioned. So that's why it's so important to look at the product and identify those hotspots and the most significant aspects in terms of sustainability related to a product. It also means that you're not trying to mask a poor product performance in other areas or shifting the burden from certain components. So finally, you also need to talk about a genuine benefit that goes beyond legal compliance. We have seen also examples in the market where someone makes a claim about a certain sustainability benefit of the product, but actually it's something that they're required by law. And then, of course, it's not really an effort worth mentioning. So here, for example, we have an example that shouldn't be followed where there's a mattress that says it's ozone friendly, but then that's not really a hotspot for that type of product. So there would be much better sustainability issues to mention with that product. The third principle is clarity. That means to make the information useful for the consumer. Here we want to have an exclusive and direct link between the claim and the product, so it shouldn't be vague in any way. And also it needs to be explicit and easy to understand for the consumer. And the limits of the claim need to be clearly stated. Here, for example, we have that issue of many claims, let's say, using very vague terms like eco-friendly or green, where it's not really clear to the consumer what does that actually mean. So it's really important to be very specific about the sustainability benefit that you're claiming for your product. And here we have, for example, there are some good examples out there on recycling guidance, for example, in certain markets like the UK and also Australia and South Africa, for example. But we also see a lot of, especially with recyclability, we see a lot of times, for example, just use the Möbius loop, and then it's not always very clear of whether the product is recyclable or not without further instructions. The fourth principle is transparency, to satisfy the consumer's appetite for information and not hide, let's say, the evidence to substantiate your claim. So you need to be clear about who developed the claim, and the evidence needs to be published. Also, the traceability needs to be ensured, and confidential information should even be open to competent bodies to assess the claim in more detail. And here it's also important, of course, you don't want to overload the consumer with too much information, but it should be accessible. So you can, for example, on your website, make more information available about how the claim is supported and substantiated, and what actors are involved in ensuring the sustainability. For example, here, if you just say about that your tea producers receive for payment without further information, then there's no transparency, and the consumer cannot really know whether to trust that information or not. The last principle of the fundamental principles is accessibility. So here the importance is to let the information get to the consumer and not the other way around, that the consumer actually actively needs to look for the information, because we know that many people don't take that extra time. So it needs to be really easily accessible and clearly visible so that the claim can easily be found. Also ideally close to the product and at the required time and location. For example, sometimes you also, in some ways, it's not always just about the purchase of the product, but also how consumers use the product. So ideally, if there are sustainability information related to the use of the product, then that should also be made sure that it's accessible when the consumer needs it. And here we also now, with digital technology, we have a lot of more opportunities to make information more accessible for people using different channels and tools like QR codes, for example, if the packaging space is limited. So those were the 5 fundamental principles. And now I'm going into the 5 aspirational principles. So these are principles we think are, let's say, a bit more difficult to meet, and also, but should be an aspiration for companies to meet over time, something to work on to have an even bigger impact with their communications. So the first one is the 3 dimensions of sustainability. I think this is actually one where some would maybe argue that it also is quite fundamental in a way, but the reality, I think, is that it's quite difficult for many companies to meet all 3 dimensions right away. So that's why I guess it's more an aspiration to do that over time. We also know that many of the existing labels and certifications right now, they focus on certain aspects, maybe more on social or environmental. And yeah, that makes it quite difficult for companies to meet all 3 dimensions equally. But this should be the goal, to do that over time. There's also the risk of burden shifting between the dimensions, which needs to be avoided. So yeah, not to just focus on, for example, the environmental component, but not the social impacts. And that's also where, again, the hotspot analysis is important, because sometimes social aspects can be even more important. And then, there's I see there's something in the chat, but I can't see it fully. But hopefully we can get to questions later. But just the final point is on the complementary certification schemes. So there is an option to combine, for example, different schemes. Let's say, for example, you can combine fair trade and the organic label the European organic label, and then you have like the fair trade is stronger on the social components and organic label on environmental. Um, but yeah, I think that's also an area where we need to see more labels having, expanding, let's say, their criteria to meet all the three dimensions better, to make it easier for businesses to do the same. The next principle is behavior change and longer term impact. This means to help consumers move from information to action. So here we encourage companies to apply insights from behavioral science and encourage the consumers to play an active role in sustainable consumption and production, and then build a longer term relationship with the consumer. So here we have a good example from Ariel, the company that encouraged consumers to wash with 30 degrees. There's, I think, still a perception from many consumers that you need to sometimes wash with 40 or 60 degrees, but they basically the detergents now are so powerful that or like designed to be effective even with 30 degrees, and that helps to lower the environmental impact, of course, from the washing cycles. So here they used a big campaign and also on product information to encourage consumers to turn to 30 degrees. Then also using a multi-channel and innovative approach. That's the next principle. So engaging consumers in diverse ways, using various complementing communication channels. Also, that's to reach, because consumers have different information seeking habits. So if you use various channels, there's a better chance that you reach all of them. Address different user groups, and the information should be complementary and not overloading the consumer. So you need to strike a good balance between, not giving too much information. Here, I think the example was from a retailer in France that also tried to encourage consumers to not avoid fruits that don't look conventional, let's say. That was a funny example, I think, in terms of being a bit more innovative. The ninth principle is on collaboration, working with others to increase the acceptance and credibility. That can be quite important because I think some consumer groups can be quite skeptical of claims made by businesses. So for businesses, it can also be an opportunity to work with other, for example, environmental organizations or other stakeholders and try to strengthen the credibility and increase the trust in the claims being developed and ensure also that the claim development is being strengthened by involving other stakeholders and get their input, and then using joint communication channels with these partners to communicate about the sustainability efforts. Also important to use inclusive language to make consumers feel part of a movement. And the final principle is comparability. So here it is about helping consumers choose between similar products. The product comparisons need to be substantiated well and helpful for consumers. This is, I think, quite a critical principle, actually, even though it's the last one now in the presentation. But I think, in a way, this is a big barrier that we have right now, that the sustainability information in many cases is not comparable for the consumer. So you have maybe one label that says something about climate and then another label about biodiversity or being organic or product. And then how can consumers compare all these different types of information? There's a lack of harmonization, I think, of sustainability information. And then right now, I think there are some developments towards, for example, eco scores that combine several environmental criteria in one let's say, label or information tool. And I think that has a lot of potential because then maybe you get a scale similar to the Nutri-Score from A to E, for example, and that gives consumers kind of a snapshot overview of the sustainability of products, and they can compare between different products, but it's very difficult to get the methodology right, I think. And yeah, that's why it's quite complicated. But a good example that we know of course, is the energy labeling that's been quite successful in the EU and other countries in quickly giving consumers information about the energy efficiency of appliances. And for many electric appliances, of course, that's a big environmental aspect, let's say, to consider. Then we also have to issue that in some markets there's a lot of regulation in terms of making comparable claims, so that's why it's also quite a sensitive issue, and you need to be sure that if you make comparable claims that you use a method or an approach that is maybe supported by government or third parties and very objective, of course, and that you follow a very clear guidance, so not to disadvantage your competitors. So those were the 10 principles, and since we developed them in 2017, we have done a lot more work on basically working with the guidelines more and also trying to implement them, let's say, with working with businesses and also governments. And here we have also done, after the publication, we have done a road testing exercise, we called it, of the guidelines, working with many different companies and standard setting organizations to apply the guidelines 10 principles to their sustainability claims or certification schemes. And it helped us to understand how feasible it is to apply the guidelines in different sectors and for different types of claims. Identify where the challenges are in terms of product sustainability information, and to collect good practice case studies and lessons learned in different regions and sectors. So in total, we had about 28 road testers and developed, I think, around 22 case studies. So not all of them were developed into a case study, but we worked with all these companies and labeling organizations. So here you can see some examples. For example, MSC. We had some big companies like Mondelez or Woolworths or Auchan, a retailer in France and Spain, but also some SMEs, so different sizes, to see also whether it works for companies of different size. Here just very quickly some general results from the road testing exercise. So we found that the pertinence of the two categories of principles was confirmed. So there was a lot of let's say agreement on having fundamental and aspirational principles, and also in general that the fundamental principles were seen as more important and easier to meet, let's say. In general, the 10 principles were easy to comprehend and were seen as having the potential to help organizations improve the communication tools they employ, and that they can help make claims more objective, consistent, and clear for consumers. But there were also certain challenges in applying some of the different principles, and that was also varying over types of organizations and claims being made. I'm not going to go into more detail here. Here just outlining three of the main challenges we identified. One was on the availability of space on packs. So of course there's a competition with many other messages concerning, for example, safety, nutrition, health, and the general product performance, and just marketing, I guess, in terms of making sure that you also put the sustainability information in a prominent space there. Another big issue is the complexity of sustainability information. I already alluded to that with the 3 dimensions, but also, for example, the hotspots analysis approach, that's also something many organizations were not so familiar with. And I think it's quite critical that they know, okay, what types of information do they need to communicate about with their products, and how do you make sure that while sustainability is so complex also because of the trade-offs between different let's say impacts, or how do you communicate that clearly without confusing the consumer? And also, I guess there's so many different labels out there that even for the businesses, it's sometimes difficult to navigate and know which ones to use. And then this also relates to the lack of harmonized approaches. So we think there should be more collaboration between standard setting organizations and brands, and having a more consumer-oriented approach. How to further progress in the field. Here are some ideas for us that we were also following up and working further. So, for example, the first point was to provide additional guidance on the implementation of certain approaches and principles. Also, how to apply them in different types of organizations or claims. So, for example, that's something we've also been discussing a lot, is whether because right now the guidelines are very general, but sometimes we felt whether it would be more useful to break them down in different sectors or for different types of environmental issues, for example. So right now last year we have developed some guidance on e-commerce. I'll quickly explain that later. And right now we're also developing something on related to chemicals in products information, because that's another big issue where I think, especially for consumers, they have very little knowledge about what types of chemicals are being used in products, whether it's safe or not. I think, yeah, that's another very sensitive issue in certain sectors. A third point is to enhance collaborations and create synergies. So that's why we're quite happy here to work with the ICPEN as well and your members and the work that you are doing, at a national level on this. And then finally also the policy level. As I said, we also work with governments directly in some countries to make them aware of the guidelines and see if they can pass legislation to better substantiate green claims. So now, as I mentioned, last year we started developing guidelines for e-commerce specifically. So that was also partly informed by the pandemic. As you know, online shopping has increased as a result. I mean, the trend was already there, but I think it's been further accelerated by the pandemic, keeping people at home and making them do their shopping online. And so we thought, okay, let's have a closer look at the consumer information and sustainability information on online platforms. And we found that actually there was a lot of need to have more specific information. In some ways, it's even more lacking, let's say, than compared to the physical markets, let's say, because online, in a way, a lot of times the consumer cannot even see the full packaging. So there's a lot of information there that's not accessible online. But at the same time, there's also, of course, a lot of opportunities to provide more information, make the information more interactive, or use, for example, filters, nudges, different, let's say, uh, strategies to better engage consumers in sustainable consumption. So also for this, right now we developed 2 pages on each of the 10 principles. We don't have time to go into all of them and right now, but those 2 pages are really, I think, quite a nice breakdown of each principle and what's important there. Like they highlight some of the challenges. There's practical examples being given and what are the most important considerations regarding that principle in an online setting. And then, just maybe to highlight one principle here, I picked out relevance, the second principle. So here, for example, it's important that e-commerce platforms identify sustainability hotspots again of the products, and they can ensure through third parties which aspects of sustainability information are most relevant for a given product. And then they can also, for example, use filter options to lead consumers to the most sustainable product choices regarding certain sustainability considerations. How to ensure this principle, check whether highlighted claims are addressing hotspots of the product, and develop and apply strong criteria for sustainability filters and product descriptions. So here we had one good practice example for example, for electronic devices. The hotspots are really the energy consumption and the repairability of the device. So it would be good to really talk about those two aspects when you communicate about the sustainability of your product. And now, as the final part of the presentation, I'm just checking the time whether we have still a couple of minutes, but we have some examples that we usually want to run through with in our trainings, but since this is not quite as interactive, but we'll see how we can manage. I thought maybe I read out the example, and then you can put in the chat what principles you think are being missing or not addressed here. I see Rosie says we're good for time, so I'll go ahead. So here we have the first example is Mikali. He would like to buy environmentally friendly produced headphones. He searches online by using keywords such as green, sustainable, or eco-friendly, and then while several marketplaces advertise their products as sustainable, he cannot find evidence for these claims. When looking for proofs, he finds a short description on the producer's website, but no further information or details on the methods behind the process. In the end, all he finds are models with sustainable packaging. Macaulay is frustrated because he knows that packaging only plays a minor role within the life cycle of headphones. How can he be sure that claims are substantiated? What information can be trusted? So in your, like after you've heard me present the 10 principles, which ones do you think are addressed in this example? Well, let's say not sufficiently addressed by the platforms. I wonder if I can get up the chat in my view, but otherwise I'm just hoping that you're putting something in the chat. So if you just put the name of the principles you think that are addressed here. I see someone just put relevance and transparency. That's a good start. Anyone else want to put something? Clarity. Good. Yeah, that's also good. So relevance as well from Julia. Great. I think we can move to the next slide. And yeah, indeed, you made some of the correct answers, let's say. Reliability was another one. Relevance and transparency. So yeah, relevance I think is the one that stands out with the hotspots not being covered. But yeah, also reliability because he didn't find proof, or transparency. I think those two are always quite related. So no clear substantiation of the information. But also, like, of course, some other principles are also relevant, but these are the three main ones from the example. So here we have the second example. Fong likes to shop online, the website of a global retailer for all kinds of products from books to clothes and groceries is presented in a natural look, and the online retailer describes itself as responsible and green. However, can he be sure that the products offered also adhere to these claims? Unfortunately, there is no filter or dedicated shop for sustainable products. How is he supposed to find them? Fong is a bit lost since it's not clear to him on which basis he should compare all the available product alternatives and where to set priorities. So again, in the example, we also outlined some keywords for you to give a bit of a hint of what we're looking for. So again, please put in the chat the principles that you think are being addressed here, or not addressed, let's say. Oh, I see more and more now, but I'm having trouble with the screen. So I see reliability, clarity, comparability, also clarity and clarity and transparency. So comparability, transparency again. Yeah, clarity, accessibility, and comparability are the ones that stand out here. I think clarity, comparability were mentioned a few times. Accessibility as well, because yeah, it's difficult. You find it difficult to find those products, and there's no easy way of identifying them. And now we move to the final example. So this is about Olga. She likes to shop conveniently on the internet using her favorite e-commerce platform, which often recommends her products that fit her habits. As she recently started to care more about climate change, she would like to improve her shopping behavior to lower her climate impact. When looking for a sustainable bathing suit, she only finds options that declare they use recycled materials. She wonders whether there are also other aspects of sustainability that she should consider, and searches for product sustainability information on the platform. Olga is redirected to another organization, which seems somewhat unprofessional to her. She is unsure about the credibility of the information provided and wonders why the platform has chosen this collaboration partner. Okay, I'll just open up the chat again to see what you think, which principles are mainly addressed in this example. Reliability is in the chat, transparency, clarity, maybe also some of the aspirational principles, if you remember them. Relevance has someone put in here. Collaboration and behavior change. Great. Yeah, collaboration, definitely. There's a mention of collaboration partners. Um, and then, for example, again, also the 3 dimensions are mentioned here as well. Behavior change, again, great. Yeah, and there someone just put it in the chat as well. 3 dimensions, 2 people. Great. Yeah, so I think I can see that I already had some success in training you on the principles, so that's good to see, and thank you for participating in the chat. With that, just outlining some key learnings that we had from applying the guidelines in the e-commerce setting. So we really found that platforms make it difficult for consumers right now to find the sustainability information they are looking for. Quite often, it's very hidden, the information, or not very, let's say, um, yeah, also not very clear whether the information is linked to the products or it's more general. Um, and while there are some good efforts from certain platforms, they usually do not emphasize all of the 10 principles sufficiently. Even just the 5 fundamental principles are not often not met by the communications. For example, one other challenge is also that sometimes, of course, there are, or like in online setting, we have sometimes marketplaces, let's say, and then there's many different sellers involved. So then it's also the question, who is responsible for providing the information? Should the marketplace ensure that the sellers all provide that information in a standardized way, or yeah, that's a little bit. And how can the marketplace verify the information that the sellers are providing about the sustainability of the products? So that's a big issue where there's a lot more work to be done. Um, but generally, we think the platforms should use the guidelines to improve the product sustainability information on their websites to better engage the consumer in sustainable consumption. Now, as my final slide, just to show a little bit the other tools at your disposal. So we have, as I said, worked on the guidelines from several years now and developed, for example, a lot of other tools. We've translated the guidelines in several languages, including French, Chinese, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian was the latest translation we did together with our partner in Russia Ecological Union. Then we also have developed a video last year that's really a quite nice way of presenting the 10 principles in a 5-minute video. I can put the link up. And basically all the information you see is on our product sustainability information hub. I mentioned the road testing and the case studies, so you can find all the case studies online as well. I think it was 2020 probably when we did a report on plastic packaging specifically, because that's also one where we see a lot of misleading claims because yeah, businesses know that consumers are very aware of plastic pollution and very concerned about it. So they want to say something, let's say, positive about the plastic they are using, but in many cases it's not well substantiated or yeah, frankly misleading the information they put out. Um, yeah, we also offer like training toolkits that we can make available and run training sessions like today. And then I already mentioned the chemical supplement that we are developing. And another thing that we are developing more tailored for businesses is like an online self-paced challenge. So this is something that we're developing in towards the end of this year. Hopefully we can launch that, and that will also be helping us to encourage businesses to follow the 10 principles. So with that, I end my presentation, and I guess we will go to the questions later. So I'm just handing back over to Rosie. Just gonna stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Nils, for that interesting and informative presentation. Can I just check, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can
Yes,
see
you
it.
can. Excellent. So firstly, a little bit about the Competition and Markets Authority, what we are and who we do. The Competition and Markets Authority is the UK's leading competition and consumer protection body. We take enforcement action against businesses who are breaking competition or consumer protection law by treating other businesses or consumers unfairly. And although you might not expect a body like the CMA to be interested in climate change issues, supporting the transition to a low carbon economy is one of our top priorities. We're doing that in lots of different ways. We've published advice for businesses who want to cooperate to improve their environmental footprint. We've investigated electric vehicle charging in the UK, and we've made recommendations to government on how to improve access. And we're taking action against greenwashing, so consumers aren't misled about the products or services they're buying. So I'm sure most of you in the audience will be very familiar with the idea of greenwashing, and certainly following Nil's presentation. So when a company creates the impression they're less harmful or more beneficial to the environment than they really are, this can harm consumer trust and reduce the incentive for businesses to do the right thing. There's been a big jump in the numbers of consumers who want to buy stuff that's better for the environment, and a corresponding growth in businesses who offer those products. But unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more greenwashing. In November 2020, the CMA joined with other ICPEN members to lead a sweep of green claims on websites. Between us, we looked at hundreds of websites, and we found that at least 40% of the green claims we saw were suspicious. That could be for lots of different reasons. Some used vague terms or were unclear. Some didn't appear to have any evidence to back up their claims, and others, it was the appearance of the product advertised. With so many potential problems, the CMA decided to tackle the issue head on. We ran a call for inputs at the end of 2020 to find out more about the problem of greenwashing. We spoke to a lot of stakeholders, consumer groups, and businesses, and it became clear that greenwashing was a real concern for businesses, consumers, and other stakeholders. So in September last year, we published new guidance on making environmental claims and goods and services, our Green Claims Code. So what do businesses need to do? Firstly, they need to make sure that they comply with any sector or product specific laws. Then they need to read our guidance and consider whether they need to make any necessary changes. For example, stopping making any false statements, amending claims, and ensuring that they have the evidence to support the claims made. So what is the Green Claims Code? The goals of the Green Claims Code are very similar to the objectives of the UN One Planet guidelines, in particular, the core principles that Nils has just run through. The Green Claims Code doesn't introduce any new legal obligations. It seeks to clarify how the existing UK law applies and makes it clear to businesses what we expect of them. And we expect them to stop greenwashing. But we also want to give businesses the confidence to tell people about the great work they're doing. And of course, to protect consumers who are trying to choose products and services which are environmentally friendly. The guidance applies across all sectors and outlines 6 principles which I'll now run through. These are rules of thumb for businesses, which, if they follow them, they're more likely to be on the right side of the law. First and foremost, businesses making environmental claims must be truthful and accurate. Businesses can't mislead consumers by giving them false or inaccurate information, or an inaccurate impression about their environmental credentials. Nor should they overstate or exaggerate the sustainability or positive environmental impact of a product, service, process, brand, or businesses. Businesses must live up to the claims they make. For example, businesses must not claim or otherwise give the impression that a product is recyclable if it's not, or if only parts of it are and others are not, and that prevents it from being recycled. Here we have some questions businesses can ask themselves to help assess whether the claim they're making is truthful or accurate. So, for example, considering if any caveats apply to the claim and whether these are sufficiently clear. Another example we could use here would be marking a disposable cup as compostable, but not specifying the action the consumer needs to take for the cup to compost. And importantly, considering if the overall impression created really matches reality. Second, claims should be worded in a way which is transparent and straightforward, so consumers can easily understand them. They should not be presented in ways that are liable to confuse consumers or give the impression that a product, service, brand, or business is better for the environment than it really is. Here we have again some questions that businesses can ask themselves to help assess whether their claim they're making is clear. The meaning of all terms used should be clear. For example, scientific language should be avoided unless it's understood by the average consumer. If needed, keywords should be defined. If vague or all-encompassing terms are used, the product, service, or business must live up to the impression that this creates. It should be clear what part of the product, service, or business the claim relates to. For example, if the recyclable claim relates to a specific part of the packaging, this should be stated. Businesses should consider whether the information provided is relevant to the claim being made and presented in a clear way that the average consumer is likely to understand. If not, the claim could give a false impression about the environmental impact of the relevant product, service, brand, or business. The information provided should always support the claims being made. What claims don't say can also influence the decisions consumers make. Claims made by businesses should not leave out or hide information that consumers need to make informed choices. Claims can omit or hide information if a business focuses on saying one thing but not another, or where it says nothing at all. It's vital that businesses pay close attention to the information on environmental impacts that consumers need to make decisions and reflect that in the claims they make. Take, for example, a business making a claim about net zero or carbon neutrality targets. Many consumers don't understand these terms, so it's important that these claims are as clear as possible. Businesses need to be clear about what they're doing and how they're doing it. They should include accurate information about whether and by how much they're actively reducing their carbon emissions and how much they're offsetting emissions. And if businesses are offsetting, they need to tell consumers about the scheme they're using. If not, consumers could be misled into thinking that products or processes generate no or few emissions when that's unlikely to be the case. So I think we're halfway through our principles now, and you'll probably already be able to see the similarities with those in the UN One Planet guide. Our next principle relates to comparisons, and it's linked to the idea that claims be truthful and accurate. If a business is comparing itself or its products to another business or other products, they need to use clear, up-to-date, and objective information. And this applies too if a business is comparing its current products to previous versions. Claims should make it clear to consumers what's being compared and how the comparison has been made. Claims should compare important and representative features or aspects of the relevant products. Businesses should make sure products are compared using the same measures and the same attributes of products or service are being compared. Claims shouldn't omit or hide material information relevant to the comparison. Comparative claims should be capable of being substantiated by transparent and accurate evidence that consumers can verify for themselves. For example, if a business makes a claim that its clothing range is now greener, it's likely to be a problem if the business doesn't say what it's greener than or why it's greener. On the other hand, if a business says all our clothes contain 50% more recycled fibers than before, and that's true, then it's less likely to be a problem. Our next principle relates to evidence. Most environmental claims are likely to be objective or factual claims that can be tested against scientific or other evidence. Businesses need to have the evidence to support them. And if they don't, then that's a real problem from a consumer perspective. When thinking about making a green claim, businesses should think carefully about whether they have the appropriate evidence to support it. In general, the evidence should be robust, credible, and up to date. It may come from published research, for example, or studies a business has commissioned or conducted. The more independent and widely supported the evidence, it's more likely it will support the claim. It's also important to keep claims under review, and it may be necessary to revisit them and the evidence that supports them over time. Keeping evidence up to date is likely to be particularly important where claims are maintained for longer periods or in areas where scientific understanding or consumers' expectations are developing quickly. It's important that claims reflect real-world conditions. If, for example, the results of lab tests are used to support a claim about the way in which a product might break down over time, does this reflect conditions that would generally or normally be experienced by consumers in the real world? If the claim is based on evidence where conditions are unlikely to be replicated in normal day-to-day use or only replicated in very specific circumstances, then it could be misleading. Our final principle is about the product life cycle. Now, in an ideal world, we'd get comparable information about the whole life cycle of every product on sale. But that's not a legal requirement in the UK. So instead, businesses just need to think about the life cycle so they can make sure they're not misleading their consumers. Claims can be based on a specific part of an advertised product's life cycle or part of the business's activities, and businesses need to make clear which aspect they refer to. But if a business is making a claim about a specific aspect of their environmental impact and ignoring some of the other aspects of its life cycle, they might be giving consumers the impression they're greener than they actually are. Say, for example, a business claims to be reducing the plastic content of their packaging, but they've switched to something that has a high carbon footprint to manufacture and is harder to recycle. They could well be misleading consumers by telling them only that they've reduced the plastic in their packaging. So here we have a slide that shows a quick summary of the 6 principles in the Green Claims Code and the fundamental principles outlined in the UN One Planet guidelines. As you'll have noticed through the presentation, there are a lot of similarities, and fundamentally, a lot of our principles overlap with each other, where you'll see some points made in some of the principles and then they're made again, because it is ultimately about providing kind of truthful, accurate information that a consumer can understand and doesn't mislead them. So I'm going to now run through just a couple of 3 very short case study examples that are contained in the CMA's Green Claims Code, just to provide you some ideas kind of how the principles might apply. So case study 1 relates to a business making a claim that a new version of its product is now 50% more environmentally friendly. This is based on the fact that one of the materials that goes into the product is now sourced from fully recycled and recyclable material. However, the same production process is still followed, which uses significant amounts of energy, and some of the other materials used in the product are not recyclable and require specific specialist disposal. Such a claim could mislead consumers about the environmental performance of the product for a number of reasons. Firstly, the claim suggests it refers to the overall environmental performance of the product, when in fact it only refers to a specific element and doesn't mention the other aspects of the product have a negative environmental impact. Second, the language used in the claim is very vague. There's no explanation of what environmentally friendly means. Third, it's not clear what the business is comparing the performance of its products to. It could be with an earlier product of the business's own or another business's product. Nor is it clear how well the product, or that with which it's being compared, performs in absolute terms. If the increase in the amount of recycled material in the product is only from 5% to 7.5, but many other similar products generally contain a significantly higher percentage of recycled material, this is also likely to be misleading. The relative performance of the product would still be significantly worse than its competitors. And here we see the problem with a term like environmentally friendly that's so vague, it makes it really hard for consumers to understand the meaning of it. Finally, the business will need to be able to substantiate the claim. While it may have evidence to show the specific increase in the amount of recycled material used in the product, it'll be more difficult to substantiate the more general claim that the product is 50% more environmentally friendly, given the other aspects of the product. Case study 2 is regarding a soup which is sold in a carton which says nature's friends, better for the environment. The way that this is presented gives the overall impression that the product and the packaging are better for the environment. This is likely to be misleading in this case because although the ingredients of the soup are sustainably farmed, the carton is silent about its composition and disposal. In fact, it contains non-recyclable plastic, which has a negative environmental impact and is hard to dispose of other than in a landfill site or incineration. The omission of the information about the packaging risks misleading consumers in relation to their choices about buying and disposing of the product. If the claim said, for example, soup that's better for the environment, sustainably farmed ingredients. Sorry, clicked too far then. If the soup said, if the claim said soup that's better for the environment, sustainably farmed ingredients, or recipes that are better for the environment, this is less likely to mislead, although the packaging should be clearly marked as non-recyclable. Alternatively, if the carton were recyclable and clearly marked as such, and the product life cycle had been reviewed in full, then the overall claim that the product is better for the environment would be more likely to be accurate. The third case study looks at a shampoo bar named Eco Shampoo. The shampoo bar is packaged in a cardboard box with green rainforest imagery and the inner non-recyclable plastic film. The eco claim is based on the product being more compact and using less plastic packaging than the traditional shampoo. However, some of the materials come from the Amazon rainforest and have been shipped via freight to Europe, where the bar has been manufactured in a large factory. The final product has then been shipped to the UK for packaging. The claim eco shampoo is misleading because it creates the overall impression that the product has a positive or no negative environmental impact, despite the adverse effects of the major elements of the product life cycle. If the company wants to make a claim about the environment, it may be able to make a more specific claim about using less packaging. However, it would need to avoid giving a misleading impression about the overall environmental impact of the product. Now, I know a lot of you listening here today will be here as individuals, and obviously from your own perspective, you're interested in what businesses are doing, but personally, you might like to know that in addition to the guidance for businesses, we've come up with some tips for shoppers. I know from personal experience how difficult it can be to shop for goods, which I'm certain are not harmful for the environment. And it's impossible to come up with bulletproof tips for consumers. But we've come up with 5 that we hope will give consumers more confidence. So firstly, we have don't just trust slogans or vague terms. This is about phrases such as all natural, green and eco, which sound nice, but they don't provide a clear meaning and can leave room for misinterpretation. Consumers should be wary of any claims that are not easily defined or supported from adequate information. Businesses should be making it easy for consumers to tell how they or their product or service provides a benefit or is less harmful to the environment. And if consumers aren't sure, they should check the ingredients or supporting information and research anything they're not familiar with. Secondly, look for evidence to support a claim. If a consumer's not sure about a claim, they should check it by reading the small print or go to the company website for evidence. It shouldn't be difficult to find the proof to support the claim, and a genuinely environmentally friendly company will be providing that. If it's difficult, that's not a good sign. Thirdly, looking past appearances. So images of wildlife, a logo with a leaf can easily convince the consumer that a business is making an environmentally friendly choice. Even the use of earthy, natural tones or a green font can give the impression that a product or service is good for the environment. But that might not be the case when you look a little closer. Consumers shouldn't just rely on the marketing, they should read the full description. Next up, don't forget about the disposal. So this is about thinking what you'll do when you finish with the packaging and the product. So it should be clear whether any environmental claim about how to dispose of these kind of relates to the product, packaging, or both. It's important to check if you fully understand when you're buying a product how you're going to dispose of the packaging and the product. Is it recyclable and which bin should you use to do so? And the last consumer tip is thinking about the bigger picture. So a product or service may claim to be environmentally friendly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all its elements or its overall impact are positive for the environment. And there could be information that a business doesn't tell you. So make sure that you consider the big picture. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say about the CMA's Green Claim Code. We have a hashtag, we've got our own Green Claims Code campaign site, and on that we have a video about the Green Claims Code, and we have a quiz for businesses as well, with more kind of resources on there. So we can share the link to that after this. And now I'll pass over to Andrea and Ana Filipa from Portugal to do their presentation.
Hi, good morning to you all. First of all, I would just like to say that Felipa wasn't able to sign in as a panelist, so she is participating as a participant. I don't know if this causes any trouble, Niels. Just checking.
I can make her a panelist. What's the...
Yeah,
Where does she appear in
she
the
is
list, is it?
appearing as Felipa Claro.
Okay. I've done it now.
Okay, good. I will start by sharing so that Filippa can start.
Hi, good morning.
Hello, we can hear
Hi.
you. Great.
Sorry, I was not able to activate the sound, but now it's perfect.
Great.
So,
Can you see
I
it?
will start. Yes,
Yeah.
I will start and then I will pass to my colleague Andrea. So, good morning, colleagues, or good afternoon. My name is Filipa, and together with my colleague Andrea, we will make a brief presentation of the guide that the Consumer Directorate General in Portugal has developed in cooperation with the Portuguese Advertising Self-Regulation regarding environmental claims. Well,
Feel free to
nowadays...
turn
Sorry?
on your camera if you want. Sorry.
So, oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry, it's not cooperating. The computer.
It's fine. Don't worry
Sorry,
about it.
I will move on. So as I was saying, the previous presentations has already mentioned the main issues with the green claims, and nowadays it has become frequent to come across references to the sustainability of a product or a services. So seals, logos, and certifications are all over the place, and also the use of expressions such as green or eco have been trivialized, and generic and vague environmental claims are often a practice in the market. So, considering the duties of the Consumer Directorate General, namely the monitoring and supervising of advertising in Portugal, and the growing impact of commercial communication using environmental claims, that aim to influence consumer purchase decisions. In October 2021, we have presented this guide that aims to provide guidelines both to economic operators and consumers. Before, I would like to say that the guide is essentially divided into 4 chapters. The first one addresses the concept of environmental claims and contains guidelines for economic operators. A second chapter is focused on the consumer and presents a set of information and alerts that consumers should be aware when purchasing a good or services. And finally, 2 chapters dedicated to what are considered to be good and a bad practice, and a checklist related to environmental claims. So that said, let me go through the guide. So as I was saying, the guidelines include guidance that is aimed to economic operators, that aims to provide some topics, some principles, some guidance to what should be their practice when using environmental claims, so they do not lead consumers by with false claims. Also includes information aimed set includes some alerts to consumers. Andrea,
Sorry.
we can move on. So, essence of environmental claims is in marketing communication demonstrates that the concern of economic operators to communicate sustainability attributes that are of interest to consumers. These claims can be found in advertising for products and services in various among of sectors such as food, clothing, cosmetics, energy, and transport. However, and has already been mentioned, these environmental claims do not always include clear, truthful statements and information backed by technical and scientific studies to support the attributes that are being claimed. So, What is an environmental claim? This guidance gives us a meaning of this environmental claim by saying that is a statement or information convened in marketing communications suggesting that a product or service has a set of attributes that have a positive or a less harmful impact on the environment. The claim can be presented by means of statements about the environment and sustainability, recyclability, energy, and water efficiency, among others. Also, the environmental claim can also take the form of a logo, distinctive seal, symbol, image, or color, creating in consumers the idea of consumption acts and practice that respect the planet. However, given the variety of these green seals, logos, and symbols, this creates some confusion to consumers, given that not all these seals and logos are provenient from a certification scheme that complies with specific requirements and procedures. So, what should the environmental claim must be? How should the environmental claim must be? It should be, what are the principles? It should be true, accurate, and capable of being proved by scientific evidence. It should be relevant. The claim should objectively reflect the specific environmental benefit and should only relate to aspects that already exist or are likely to emerge during the life cycle of the product. Should be clear and explicit on which environmental future the claim is referring to, and should be communicated using simple and accessible language without exaggerating the environmental advantages or features. Whenever we have an environmental claim that is vague and a general statement and is not supported by scientific assessments about the environmental benefits of the product, we might be beyond an unfair commercial practice. This environmental claim may also be misleading or likely to mislead consumers, even if the information is factually correct, and it may constitute an unfair commercial practice. So, we are often presented by an unfair commercial practice that is a greenwashing. And this is when we have incorrect, unclear, vague, irrelevant, exaggerated environmental claims that are not based on scientifically proven evidence. This unfair commercial practice is contrary to the Advertising Code and the Unfair Commercial Practice Act. Using environmental claims such as environmentally friendly, ecological, sustainable, protects the environment, biodegradable, and zero carbon. These vague expressions may present us with the unfair commercial practice as the greenwashing. So now we pass on to another chapter that is focused on consumer. Andrea?
Okay, thank you, Filipa. So as Filipa told you, we also have a part in this guide dedicated to consumer alerts. And building on the interest and awareness of consumers regarding the impact of their purchasing choices, we've listed a group of alerts directed to consumers in order to inform them about key aspects to have in mind and to look out for when facing environmental claims. So such some examples. I won't be bothering you with all of them. We will make this guide available so you can consult it later on. But as an example, we mentioned being aware that expressions like sustainable or environmentally friendly must be accompanied by information demonstrating the sustainable characteristic of the product, whether through tests, studies, or scientific data. Knowing that the ambiguity and or absence of information can be a form of greenwashing. So we alert consumers to the fact that there is such a thing as greenwashing, and it's usually related to absence or ambiguity of information. Or even that when facing uncertainty about a product, it is possible to question companies and to request objective data. So companies must be available to provide this type of information. In this guide, we've also addressed the theme of how to identify an environmental claim. So how can consumers know that they are before an environmental claim? We explain that such claims may be associated with products, services, or organizations, and that they often relate to the impact of a product, component, or packaging on the environment, health, water, etc. By mentioning the sustainability of a product or whether the product, component, or packaging is made from renewable materials or whether it is recyclable. Overall, the idea here is to familiarize consumers with these claims and capacitate them to detect the necessary information or the lack thereof about the sustainability of any product or service. As Felipe told you before, besides some alerts to consumers, we've also gathered a group of good and bad practices in order to give some guidance to economic operators, meaning companies, regarding good practices. Again, I won't bother you with all the examples. We have quite a long list of examples of good practices, but as an example, we refer to the use of simple, clear, and specific language, including relevant and up-to-date information, refraining from using vague and indeterminate terms such as eco or green without giving much more information. Comparing what is comparable. So when a company resorts to comparative advertising, they should be able to compare comparable products and not some maybe similar products, or even demonstrating that there is an established methodology which will ensure compliance with specific commitments. That's another example of a good practice. Together with this list, we also have some examples of bad practices, such as claiming that a product has reduced water consumption, but at the same time, it consumes more energy, for instance, when compared with a product in the same category. Using the term biodegradable regarding a product for which no studies have been carried out. That's another example. Presenting certain environmental benefits of a product as being unique, when this advantage also exists in similar products. Or even providing information regarding a claim by means of a link to a website instead of presenting it to next to the claim. So instead of giving all the information in the page where the product is presented, giving a link or a QR code that the consumer must click on or photograph in order to access more information. So in a nutshell, this is the list we gathered of good and bad practices to companies. And we also attached an environmental claims checklist. As you can see, these can be used by companies or even consumers, but mainly by companies in order for them to assess if the claim they are making is in compliance with sorry, I was just saying this, there's something on the chat. In compliance with the rules that already are established. As you can see, it's really similar to the checklist that many of you use, or many of the authorities use in SWIP exercises, for instance. And it's a way of helping companies to assess their claims. We've also gathered here some of the Portuguese and European legislation that may be applied. As of now, we are initiating a negotiation within the European Council regarding a new directive that may be may bring some developments inside the unfair commercial practices regime. So as of now, and as you can see, we already have rules that apply to these claims. However, the initiative that was presented by the Commission in March is set out to provide member states with more elements within the unfair commercial practices regime to tackle this kind of claims. Even though it's already a way to tackle them, the idea is to densify this regime in order to give authorities more tools to tackle this type of claims. This negotiation has only begun, so we are really confident that this initiative will be another tool to empower consumers regarding this green transition. But as of now, this is the legislation that is applied, as well as the self-regulation instruments that may be applied as well. We have also some additional information regarding the consumer director channel, as well as the advertising self-regulation. That is the private body that helped us with this guide, and also our contact. So I would like to thank you all for your attention. I hope this exercise has been helpful. In our perspective, this is just another example of the common goal that we are all aiming for. As we saw this morning, all the instruments that were presented are thought as a tool to bring consumers more empowerment for the green transition by providing them with the necessary information for more sustainable purchasing choices, and also by providing companies with necessary tools to communicate with transparency and accuracy. So I believe this is a common goal. Different ways to go after it, but I believe we are well set out and quite coherent in the different approaches we are. Wait, oh, sorry. Let me just. Okay, I was just stopping my presentation. So thank you once again. I hope I was clear. I tried to be quick in order to follow the timeline that we had. Any questions, we are available. Thank you. Again, I can see we have some comments on the chat. Back to you, Rosie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea and Felipe. That was really interesting. We have got a couple of questions on the chat, and we do have a little bit of time left at the end to answer them. So the first question that I can see is that only a small percentage of consumers are buying products based on their environmental footprint. At the moment, the most important criteria for consumers is buying a product is price, and how do we change that? I think it is a difficult one because we don't have control over the price, but I think there are a couple of things there certainly that we can do to help with that. I mean, the thing that we're trying to do at the CMA is to get businesses to make accurate environmental claims. Fundamentally, we don't want one business to get an advantage by making a false claim over a business that's making an accurate claim. So by creating a level playing field for environmental claims, hopefully then they would be more likely to compete on other factors. So fair competition with environmental claims will then hopefully mean that opens up for price. But ultimately, if it's about getting consumers interested in the environmental aspects of a product, then that comes to the consumer education side of things, which you'll have seen mentioned in all of our presentations. And I know, Nils, from the UN side of things, you're doing more kind of to try and get consumers thinking about their own consumption. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, what I've heard also from other conversations on this is that it's, I think, first of all, as we say, the information right now, there's not a level playing field, right? So it's difficult for consumers to really see whether they can trust the sustainability information. And also, I think it needs to be for them clear what is the benefit of me buying this sustainable product over another. Also for the planet, I think that needs to be made more tangible. Sometimes it's very abstract, right? So then it kind of prevents consumers from buying in. Then, of course, I think there can be a lot be done in terms of how we internalize the external, like the environmental impacts, right, from the production side, so that, let's say, more environmentally harmful products are becoming more expensive. I mean, there was, I think, an example in Germany from a retailer that put the true cost of products on their products to inform consumers. And for example, there it became clear that meat, for example, should be much more expensive than it is because of the environmental impacts it causes. Um, yeah, so I think that's another point. And um, yeah, I think I forgot my last point. Sorry, but yeah, that's
Thanks,
all I
Nils.
have.
And we've got another one about how can we trust authorization logos, such as MSC for sustainable fishing, when trawler boats are using large nets, destroying the ocean, being certified under such authorizations. Can we actually put trust in these logos when there is a lot of bycatch, which other person says they would not call sustainable at all? I mean, certainly there is an issue with logos, which ones can you trust, which ones are credible. I mean, we would be encouraging consumers to look beyond the logo and have a read of the information that sits behind it. But I am aware that enforcers are looking at certain logos to kind of do some work in the background and see if they are accurate. I think there will be more work done on the credibility of logos, certainly in the coming kind of months and years. Is there anything others would say about trusting logos?
Yeah, I think, I mean, generally you covered it well. I think what I would say about MSC is that it is a third-party verified label, right? And that they have a very transparent process. I mean, they put the standard on the website and people can inform themselves about what the standard stands for. I think as some there has been some criticism and let's say there's room for improvement, right? I think there are probably some environmental criteria that some people would like to see in the MSC standard that is not currently there, but um, I think, yeah, at least there is the transparency aspect, and they also have, for example, consultations, I think, when the standards are being revised with other stakeholders, for example.
Thanks, Nils. And we've got another question here, which is what about products that are, for example, made with environmentally friendly materials but have been shipped across the planet using tons of fossil fuels? The claim might be correct, but the environmental impact of the transportation would be far worse. We had this in one of our case studies in the guidance. I mean, certainly that comes to how they make the claim, whether they're specific and in line with the UN principles, of kind of the hotspot idea, with they're making a claim and it's about the most relevant part of the product and they make it clear. So if you've been making a claim with environmentally friendly materials and a business says, made with environmentally friendly materials, but they don't disclose that elephant in the room that is the massive carbon footprint of the transportation, then that could well be a misleading claim. So it's about businesses thinking about the full life cycle of their products, and then thinking about whether when they're making that claim, is it really got the potential to be misleading? And that's ultimately what our guidance, all of our different guidances are trying to get to, is that the claim shouldn't mislead. So yes, there is potential there with that type of claim that it could be misleading. I don't know if others have anything they would like to
No, I
add to
think
that.
just to agree, yeah, that's why the life cycle approach or thinking is so important to that we really cover all the aspects. And also with the principles we have, I think we mentioned the risk of burden shifting or not disclosing other, let's say, hotspots. And I think that's a good example really with the shipping. And that's, for example, also something with online shopping where it's sometimes not really clear, right? Even the packaging, you buy something and you have no idea what kind of packaging they will send it to you.
And we've had another question, Nils, which is one for you to answer, which is about if some more information could be shared on the eco score, which you use globally for product comparison.
Yeah, exactly. There are some examples. I think it's mainly coming up in the food sector now with these eco scores. I think also maybe in relation to the Nutri-Score that is already existing for products. And there was a report last year published by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I'm just gonna put the link to the website in the chat, and they actually had a benchmarking of eco scores in the food sector specifically. So I don't know, I'm not aware of similar, let's say, benchmarking exercises in other sectors, but for food there is one, and you can see in the report there's like a full table with, I don't know, about 10 or even more eco scores in development. And I think that's another issue that, at least from my side, looking at with the global perspective, that now we have different eco scores developing on a national level or from private or public initiatives. And I think ideally we should try and get to one eco score that has the perfect, let's say, methodology that we can also have the comparability, because in most cases we are now in a global marketplace, I would say.
Thanks, Nils. That's really helpful. And we've got another question here, which is, how do you assess animal welfare claims? Do you assess them in the same way as other sustainability or environmental claims? Our UK guidance doesn't extend to animal welfare claims. It's kind of focused on environmental sustainability, although we are of the opinion that the principles would apply to other types of sustainability claims. But I don't know if others have comments, Nils or Andrea or Philippa, that you would make on your guidance.
I think it's just a very specific issue, right? And
Yeah,
that's
we
also,
do
I
not
think,
address specifically that point in
yeah.
our guide.
Yeah, I think that's another challenge, right? Because I think people have different preferences, right? What's important to them? Is it climate change? Is it animal welfare, fair pay? Like, yeah, that's why even like having a score is so difficult, because to agree on the weighing, like what is the more critical issue, right? But I think yeah, what can help is of course identifying the hotspots. And I think we actually had a case study on cruelty-free, one of the labels in animal welfare, so you can check that on the website.
That's quite helpful. I mean, certainly our guidance, we don't have specific sustainability consumer protection law in the UK. We based our guidance on, the broad consumer protection law, which would apply to kind of any type of claim. So I feel that you could take our guidance and look at a animal welfare claim and follow the principles, and it would lead you back to consumer protection law and how it would apply to that scenario. So could but still be useful. I think we've got time for this one last point on the chat, which is, I'm afraid that perhaps in the case of Ariel, when creating washing detergents more powerful, so they don't need hot water, the process for creating the same detergents may be more polluting. That is a fair point. That it's a trade-off, isn't it? And sometimes in producing one benefit, you can then create kind of more harm for the environment in another way. Any comments from anyone on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's another example, right, again, of the importance of the life cycle thinking, but also the potential for rebound effects. I mean, this is one example. I mean, also in terms of behavior, sometimes we see that, for example, if appliance can be more energy efficient, but then people will be using them more often, or yeah, using bigger devices so that it's being offset again. So that's also why sustainable consumption is so challenging, I guess, in general.
Thanks, Nils. I'm aware that we're now out of time. I just wanted to say thank you very much to Nils and to Andrea and Philippa for their presentations. It's been really a useful session. Happy to take comments out with the meeting, so please feel free to get in touch if you do have any more questions or you'd like to discuss the topic any further. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to join. It's been a great session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.